those policymakers have to come together. And so with our jurisdictions, the ABA picked the 4 jurisdictions, and after they were picked, we told them we're not going to dictate what reform, what racial justice reform you work on, or what disparity exists in your jurisdiction. That's your job. Each jurisdiction picked a specific area. I'll start with Delaware. Delaware is so small that the entire state is one task force. Every other place they picked a county or a city. The entire state of Delaware imposed its own reform. And Delaware, each jurisdiction started out with what we call a working hypothesis. What do you think is a racial disparity in your justice system? And Delaware came up with probation revocation. We believe that African Americans are revoked on their probation at a higher rate than their similarly situated white counterparts. So the first thing they did was they pulled the data from their criminal justice system, and it was true. It was true. You were more likely to be revoked on your probation and less likely to get a second chance or a graduated sanction if you're African American than if you're white. Then they went about working on a reform to address that. So this is a 2-year grant. The first year was identifying the disparity, bringing the people together, collecting the data, and developing at least the initial steps of the reform. And Delaware quickly realized that, one, we need to train probation officers better. And they conducted a training session on implicit bias and what Salma talked about, cultural competence. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And bringing the probation officers in, they incorporated an implicit bias training module in their curriculum. And prospectively, they will be taking steps to curtail the discretion of probation officers in their case management system so that a probation officer can't look at both a black probationer and a white probationer and say, I'm going to give you a second chance, but you, I'm moving to revoke right away, I'm sick of you, right? They'd have to go through a series of steps, and that would all be in their case management system. So that's prospectively, in the second year of this grant, the things they'll be working on, but they focused on probation revocation. That's our first jurisdiction, Delaware. Our second jurisdiction, New Orleans, Louisiana. The nickname for New Orleans is the Big Easy, and nothing, if you've ever been there or worked there, is ever easy. I call them the Big Difficult. New Orleans has a criminal justice system, a population and a criminal justice system that is overwhelmingly African American. So any reform that you do in New Orleans is going to have a positive impact on the African American community. And they decided in New Orleans to focus on the diversion program that's run by the district attorney's office. They didn't find racial disparities in the diversion program, but what they found was not a lot of people coming through the system who should qualify for diversion are getting in the program. And then the people who get in, for some reason, can't graduate. They get stuck in the program or they fail out and end up being prosecuted. So they wanted to improve that program in several ways. One, make the eligibility criteria less stringent and onerous. They wanted to reduce the time that you have to be in diversion, how long it takes to complete it, and they wanted to develop services for the Latino community. There's an increasing Latino community in New Orleans, and no one running the diversion program speaks Spanish, or there are people who are Latino, and so they felt ill-equipped to deal with the growing Latino population of people who would qualify for diversion. So New Orleans identified the program they want to work on, and they are now enacting reforms or working on reforms that will improve their diversion program. Brooklyn, New York took a slightly different approach. Brooklyn, New York thought going in, our problem is DUI offenses. That should be, like domestic violence and some other crimes, an equal opportunity offense, right? There should not be a greater number of Latinos committing DUI versus African Americans or whites. And so all things being equal, people drink and drive at pretty much the same rate. It's a bad habit, but it's not ethnocentric in any way. But what they found when they went into their data analysis was that African Americans and Latinos were treated more harshly in their criminal justice system when they were charged with DUI offenses. You were more likely to be detained pre-trial, and your sentence was more likely to be longer if you were African American than if you were white. And so New York is now processing that data and trying to figure out, okay, why is that, and what can we do about it? We have all of the policyholders at the table who could fix this and address this. what exactly do we need to change? Or, so they have to figure out why it's happening. Is it that the judges are being more harsh, or is it that, what exactly is factoring in? So that's what New York will be working on in the second year of this grant, having identified the problem, and they have the data to support it. And our final jurisdiction is St. Louis County, Minnesota, and Duluth is the county seat. And in that jurisdiction, they went into this with a slightly different approach. Their working hypothesis was that Native Americans, their largest minority population, and secondarily African Americans, were being detained pre-trial at a higher rate than their similarly situated white counterparts, and being treated more harshly. And they then, after a bunch of difficulty trying to get the data came back and absolutely confirmed that. If you were Native American or African American, you were more likely to be held in jail pre-trial and not released. And if you were given a monetary bail, it was more likely to be higher than your similarly situated white arrestees. So there was no dispute about the data. The question was, why was that happening? And Fred kept pounding away and telling them, I'm telling you why it's happening. And everyone's like, no, Fred, you're wrong. Fred was right. One of the things that went into whether or not someone was detained and the amount of bail was their geographical distance from the courthouse. They have a county that is 190 miles wide. Now, when I'm in D.C., and I grew up on the East Coast, so 190 miles to us is really, really, really far. It's like from D.C. past Philadelphia. That's big for us. Maybe it doesn't seem big to you, but it seems huge to us. But so judges would say, you got arrested here, you live 200 miles away. I'm going to impose a heavy monetary bail on you because you might not come back, you live so far away. Or, we better hold you pre-trial, you might not come back. That is a racially neutral policy because it applies to everyone who lives far away. But it was having a disparate impact on the Fond du Lac Indian population. They were on a reservation. And the reservations, as you would imagine. I said wrong?
She said thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. I know I got that right. I've been out to Duluth.
Some of it's more of a French pronunciation.
Fond du Lac.
We didn't like the right way. Sure, no.
Not
French, why not?
Not to the people on the reservation. Anyway, they determined that because the Native American population, if they live on the reservation, are always going to be far away from the courthouse, a policy that takes into account geographical distance, even if it's racially neutral or benign, is going to have a disparate impact on that population of people. So we're finding some instances where there appears to be some intentional discrimination, and some where it appears to be just as a function of having this policy, where again, we could simply change the policy and affect the disparity. We have one of the other significant things that happened during the first year of this grant was each task force had to, in addition to their 5 key players, figure out who else in their criminal justice system needed to be a part of the task force. They quickly realized we need the person who has the data. So whoever, whether it was in the court or the police department, we need to get the data person at the table. The other thing they figured out was, in Delaware, we need the head of probation, and Duluth, we probably need the person at the jail who is over all of these pretrial detainees. And having the sheriff at the table saying, our pretrial population is grossly overpopulated with Native Americans and African Americans. It does not reflect the population at large, and we're so overflooded with pretrial detainees that we are leasing bed space in other counties, and it's costing us a lot of money. And ultimately, I was speaking to Fred and Donna about this, it may be an economics issue and not a it's morally wrong issue that causes this reform to go forward. I don't really care why, even though in my heart I would like to believe you're not doing it just because of money. In the end, we want to reduce or eliminate the disparity and prevent the over-incarceration of pretrial detainees in general, and specifically the Native American and African American detainees. So that's what our project does, and we hope that other jurisdictions can come up with their own model based upon this, bringing together those stakeholders, collecting data that already exists in your justice system, and talking about some specific racial disparities in your jurisdiction and how you can bring those policyholders together to correct them. And in each jurisdiction we've identified, once we approached the head of probation in Delaware and said, you know, you're revoking the probation of African Americans at a higher rate, he kind of went, wow, okay, what can we do?